Hello, everybody. This is the Pacific War Channel. I am Craig, and I'm joined here by my friend Ian. How are you?
Hey there, not too bad on yourself.
I'm great. And, seeing as though this week it's the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings, I thought,
Yeah,
what better
the
subject?
80th.
Yeah, it's the big 80th this year, so what
Yeah,
better
that creeped
subject?
up on us.
And I was thinking, since I still am the Pacific War Channel, how I could possibly connect this to the Pacific War. And I found a pretty neat article that compared, the two nearly simultaneous amphibious assaults
Hmm.
going on. So there was a huge operation going on in the Pacific during the D-Day landings, and I thought it's pretty interesting
Right.
comparing the two. Hey everyone, I just wanted to let you know I now have a Patreon account found at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. Over there you can find exclusive Patreon episodes and podcasts based on suggestions from patrons, and other benefits like early access to all of my content, live hangouts, your name in the end credits, and much, much more. So please go check it out.
Yeah, no, for sure. And when you think about it, a lot of the lessons were learned from the Pacific leading up to Operation Overlord. Like the Americans really ironed out the kinks in amphibious assaults. You know, from 42 and onwards from the Pacific.
Yeah. And, for those who don't know, the D-Day landings were stalled for a very long time. I mean, at the very beginning of as soon as Operation Barbarossa began, Stalin began,
Hmm.
demanding a second front was opened up.
Yeah.
And,
But there were a lot of intricate moving parts to an operation of this size. Like it wasn't, an overnight thing. There was a lot of planning that went into it.
years of planning.
Yeah, years. Yeah.
And it was actually Churchill and the British who were holding back. The Americans were kind of willing to engage in doing something, on French soil right away. But the British found
Hmm.
that since they were already doing so many operations in the Mediterranean theater, it was
Yeah.
just, a better idea to just go where they were already winning. And, well, as Churchill said, to hit the soft underbelly of Europe.
Yeah. Go in from the south. Yeah, that was definitely a British plan. That's one of the things that stalled Operation Overlord was, different factions. Like it was inevitable that the Allies were going to land in Europe, but where? That was the question on everyone's mind, and it was hard for many to agree. Like, oh, okay, do we land near Caen or go back to Dunkirk or
Yeah, I mean there was numerous places they could land. I mean, they were even doing deceptions
mm,
where they were pretending like they'd be
oh yeah,
landing in
the
Norway. So
subterfuge had been going on for like a good 6 months. Like it was hard for the Nazis to pinpoint exactly where the Allies were going to land because, like, okay, that's Fortress Europe. It's a a massive wall, basically, coastal wall, and they could have landed anywhere within. And they charged Rommel with the initial defense of the Netherlands and the English Channel. That was the most predictable spot for the landing.
definitely, and Rommel didn't exactly get his way, because if I recall
No.
correctly, he wanted to hold back. Or wait, no, I think the other commanders they wanted to hold back the mechanized forces into a big grouping so that they could hit
Yeah,
wherever a major landing would
it
happen.
lure them in a bit, uh, then smash them with the armor, and then push in on the beaches and prevent any further landings in that sector.
Which sounds good on paper, and it's kind of like doctrine. Even Rommel would
Mm.
probably agree initially, but the problem was the
Hmm.
Allies had so much air power that whatever force they would gather, I mean, they would be just smashed by bombers.
Yeah, the up until this point, and this has been one of the campaigns leading up to this, is the Allies have been smashing the Luftwaffe for the last 2 years,
Yeah.
chipping them away, whittling them down, gaining that air superiority, which was absolutely necessary to an operation of this size.
And I mean, the air superiority was devastating. I think like the Luftwaffe had maybe like 900 planes or something they could toss, and the Allies were talking like nearly maybe like 8,000. I don't even know how many planes they
Oh
had.
yeah, and it was 24/7. You had the British raiding in the evening, and then the Americans would go during the daytime, and it
Yeah.
was just nonstop bombardment throughout the the entire coastal line for the Germans.
Yeah, and for the Germans, they were, they had that Atlantic Wall thing that they thought they were going to build up. They never ended up building it up enough, and it was covering everything. I mean, it goes from Norway all the way down to southern France.
No defense is perfect,
Definitely.
And when you have overwhelming numbers, that's basic siege warfare. Use overwhelming numbers, and there really is no defense against that. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. But here, for the audience, I think it'll be interesting as kind of like a case study, and just pitch in when we want to talk, in depth more about D-Day, because obviously the emphasis should be on D-Day. But I want to bring this up to the audience because it is pretty interesting. So, D-Day, the landings themselves, they're going to happen on June the 6th, although they were prolonged by a day because of bad weather.
They were originally planned for
the 5th,
for June 5th. Yeah.
Yeah, the weather actually is extremely important.
Played a big part, yeah. So what was it? It was fog that moved in, so that would hamper not necessarily the landings themselves. There were multiple things. There was the fog that came in, and the tide was off.
The tides were, I would say the tide is one of the most important ones.
The fog made it near impossible for the paratroopers and the gliders, which was absolutely necessary to the plan, was to get behind the enemy lines and start sabotaging their artillery emplacements, everything that's aimed at the beach. And without that, it would have been a slaughter on the beach.
And for D-Day, so on June the 6th, we're talking about the Americans, the British, and the Canadians. Those are the big three. But there is 17 other nations who, in some way or another, are contributing units. Like, this is an absolute insane amount of, almost the United Nations.
It's the buildup of forces on England. Like, there's the 3rd Canadian Division that's going to land at Juno Beach. They've been in England since 1941.
Yeah.
Just itching and ready to go.
You got Poland in exile. You got Greece in exile. There's so many different governments, even the Netherlands exile, all these different units that are just contributing.
We're talking about millions of forces on the tiny island.
And they did have some experience fighting together because, I've been writing the North African campaign for Kings and Generals, and you even see, there's Greek, Polish forces, Free French forces. There's various other units that got some taste of warfare, so not all Greens or anything, these other guys, but, of course, the majority is going to be the Americans, the British, and us Canadians.
Yeah. At the top, you have Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, and he charges Montgomery with leading this operation. And they've been working together fairly well up until this point.
Yeah. I'll get into it later, but unlike what's going on in the Pacific, the D-Day landings was a political monster because of all the different nations and all the requirements for the nations.
Also, who's going to be leading the attack. And so, one of the greatest decoys that the Allies were running was they had Patton in the south.
Yep.
And so Rommel and Germans, they always assume Patton is the most capable general that the Allies have. So wherever he is, that's where the attack's going to come from.
And he has what was one of the deceptions was they faked an army under Patton, he
had balloon tanks and a bunch of decoys, and they were littering the south of France with a bunch of false not propaganda, but false battle plans, intentionally leaking it into German hands, false papers saying this is the site of the landing, blah blah blah. And for the most part, it was believed. So Rommel essentially split his forces in France.
Yeah, he had no choice.
Being in absolutely. It's okay, if I put everything in the south, they're going to come from the north. If I put everything in the north, Patton's going to come from the south. Between a rock and a hard place, basically.
Yeah, and for those, you had already mentioned Operation Overlord is the overall part of this battle, but for the landings themselves, it was designated Operation Neptune. So for just the amphibious assault. And
just to add on, we were talking about distractions and decoys, Patton being one of them. But for days now, the Allies have been dropping decoys in the Netherlands and Normandy as well. like aluminum strips that would they drop thousands of these aluminum strips out of bombers, and on the German radar it would appear, like
Yeah.
much more numerous flight going over. They were dropping dummy parachuters, like basically like remember those like army men that had the parachutes?
Yeah. Yeah.
When we were kids, yeah, so they were dropping like those, and they were like a foot to 2 feet tall. It looked exactly like soldiers parachuting in from a distance, and they were just dropping thousands of these everywhere. So it was like really keeping the Germans like on guard. It's like, oh, okay, where is the real drop?
And yeah, they had to contend with a lot because there was a lot of deception involved in. I mean, it's incredible. Like, there's a book written on just like how they created the deceptions for the Germans to like, because the Germans obviously knew they did have an intelligence network that something was coming. General idea of the time period too, but where it was coming exactly, I mean, they couldn't prepare all the beaches. But
exactly.
Over on the other side of the world, I think people really don't know about this because, like the article says, it was completely overshadowed, obviously, by D-Day because D-Day was much more significant. But the Americans had unleashed Operation Forager, so this was the invasion of the Mariana Islands. You're talking Saipan, Guam, Tinian. And it was probably, I think it was the largest, it had to be the largest amphibious assault up to that point in the Pacific War, so it was a huge one.
Up until Overlord,
Yeah. And what's interesting about these two, so they're happening basically simultaneously. The fleet for the Pacific, they're heading out on the 5th of June. They're going to make their landings on the 15th, so it's not the same day or anything, but they're basically happening at the same time. So like the United States is putting out like 200,000 people combined to be landed on two different areas of the world. It's pretty insane.
Yeah, and that's just, the expeditionary force, not to mention, the hundreds of thousands of follow-up troops that once the beachhead is secured, they're going to start moving in all their logistical equipment and make it a real, a real entry point into the continent.
Yeah. And here, I'll just, I'll give a scope for the audience so the audience can feel some of the numbers. So for the invasion of Normandy, we're looking at a fleet that's comprising nearly 7,000 vessels. So it's like 1,200 warships. There's like 4,000 landing crafts of various types, 700 auxiliary crafts, merchant vessels. There's hundreds of those. The majority of the
minesweepers.
Well, of course, the mines in front of the European continent.
A lot of minesweepers. Yeah.
The fleet's supplied mostly by the United Kingdom. It's a lot of the Royal Navy doing this. And in all, there's about almost 200,000 people involved in the D-Day landings. About 112,000 of them from the Royal Navy, 25,000 from the Merchant Navy, more than 50,000 Americans, 5,000 sailors from other countries. And, they divided it into a Western Naval Task Force under Admiral Kirk, supporting the U.S. sectors. And then there's the Eastern Naval Task Force under Philip Vane. So he's going to be with the British and the Canadians. And, as for, like, the ships, there's, like, 5 battleships, 20 cruisers, 65 destroyers. I mean, it's kind of insignificant because the Germans don't have a surface fleet to combat them. They barely have much submarines. Like, the Germans' naval capabilities to thwart this were very limited. They had some PT boats and some subs, but I mean, it's nothing too much.
At this point of the war, the Kriegsmarine is basically knocked out. They still had a lot of a presence in not the Arctic, but up in Norway, and
Norway was still bolstered. And
but the English Channel is essentially it's under Allied control.
The Americans, they're going to land.
Have air superiority.
The Americans are going to land more than 70,000 men, and like 15,000 of those are airborne troops, with the parachuters and the gliders. The British and the Canadians together, they land like about almost 80,000. It's insane numbers if you think about the scope.
Yeah.
And to give an idea, so for Forager over in the Marianas, the first island is Saipan. I won't talk about the other one. Saipan's on the 15th of June. But overall, this task force, which is run by the 5th Fleet, commanded by Admiral Raymond Spruance of Task Force 58, with Mitscher also. They've got 15 carriers, so there's a significant difference in kind of air power.
Yeah.
They got 7 battleships, 11 cruisers, almost 100 destroyers, and 900 aircraft. The invasion force, it's actually being led by Admiral Turner, and he's got 56 attack transports, 85 landing craft, and almost 130,000 troops. So
Turner, he's a veteran from Guadalcanal, right?
yep, yeah. Turner doesn't get much glory. Like no one really talks about Turner.
Hearing his name a lot.
Yeah, Turner's always there. He's like, I don't even know how to describe him. He's like a safe admiral. Like he did aggressive stuff. He, unlike someone like Fletcher or something, Turner was he had a lot
Here
under
we
his
go,
belt.
shitting on Fletcher again.
Yeah. The thing that Turner has, I think that other admirals don't. I think Turner might have had the most experience with amphibious warfare.
Amphibious, yeah.
Yeah.
He was like the first.
Yeah, because he oversaw the most of the landings, if not, I got like almost all of them. Yeah, and
he was essentially writing the book on it.
Yeah, and America by themselves, I think this is insane. They're basically, like I keep saying, like 200,000 guys are going to be landed on 2 different parts of the world. It's an insane feat, and it shows the full capability of the United States at this point.
I was having a thought about this actually. It is a turning point in human history that a non-European power waging two simultaneous massive invasions, 2 different parts of the world, like 2 different oceans, 2 continents. No other power at the time was capable of such a feat.
To this day, no one has ever dealt with the logistical line that the United States had to do, like in the Pacific. Like, if China and the United States, let's say if they actually went to war, China only has on paper what happens. They don't know the reality of landing on hundreds of islands with hundreds of thousands of troops and everything you have to think about.
Yeah.
The United States is the only country, I guess you could say maybe the Australians a bit, that has like fundamental knowledge of this. No one else has really had to deal with it on a large scale.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at D-Day and you look at what's happening on Saipan, like they're so different. The nature of their geography, I mean, like one's tropical, one's, well, it's June, so I guess it's not cold weather, but it's, our kind of weather.
just like the Atlantic Ocean, like the comparisons, it's Northern Atlantic. They don't have to deal with like coral reefs and
typhoons and all that.
Yeah.
Although, what was it? The day after I don't know, was it the day after, a few days after D-Day, they had a legendary storm that unbelievably did so much damage to like all the stuff they were building for the logistical lines, to move into the beachhead. So yeah, they dodged a huge bullet with I think it was something called like the English Gale storm. There was a fancy name for it. Yeah. And something that was really different. One thing that was really different for D-Day and for Forager is 100% American. They're dealing with Marines and the Navy. So it's the same guys. We're not even dealing with much with the Army. There's no inter-service problems. There's no other nations. So it's just pretty run by the books. They're doing what they're doing. For D-Day, it's like 18 different nations. You got commanders who are fighting for positions, and we can't insult the allied nations. There was like permissions and requests as to what they would be doing, where they would be going once they landed. Like it was kind of a political nightmare. And I mean, Eisenhower was probably a great pick to kind of like look into things.
Supreme Allied Commander, yeah.
Because like
you needed somebody to rein everyone in. That everyone answers to one person.
Because like imagine somebody, I don't know.
Look at like NATO, look at NATO now, or like the EU. There's so many like leaders, but there's no overall commander.
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult when you're dealing with different nations because no one likes to be a subordinate under a different nation. Like, if British troops have to serve an American commander,
It drove both the British and the Americans wild. Like think about Patton. Like, whenever Patton was sidestepped and, command was given to Montgomery, like, he would be a pouty child about it.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, even losing command of D-Day and it being given to Montgomery, like, Patton was deeply upset about that.
Of course.
Like, he felt betrayed. And he was thinking like he was being punished for his behavior in Sicily.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
his behavior. I mean, Patton was a wild cannon. Like
Oh yeah,
he got away with
he's
murder.
certainly a character. There's no one like him.
Yeah. Oh, like
Patton, he's the MacArthur of
Yeah.
the Atlantic.
I was gonna say because Douglas MacArthur and Patton met each other briefly in life. I want to, yeah, I think it was in World War One or something. That they briefly met, and like what they had to say about each other was kind of like lukewarm admiration, and it just kind of shows how they're kind of similar.
There are two peas in a pod.
Yeah. And to compare again, so when you're looking at D-Day, this is a landing on a entire continent where they're trying to just form there is going to be numerous beachheads, but the idea is to form like a massive beachhead in the end.
A massive one, yeah, that they can start bringing over all the equipment. Like you're talking about bringing entire cores of armor.
Oh, everything is just sitting there in Britain waiting to come over. It's hundreds of thousands of people. The industry that they're bringing over, it's like you're bringing over a country. It's insane.
Oh yeah.
Whereas for Forager,
you can see like look up photos of like D-Day +1, +2, like that signifying the day after or 2 days after. And like a few days in, like you look at the beaches of Normandy there, and it's just like a sprawling city at that point.
Yeah.
Like they set up really fast.
And for Forager, much like, other instances in the Pacific War, they're landing on an archipelago, so it's just a bunch of islands, and it's, you basically you land once, your supplies comes after, and that we call it a day. If it was a bigger island like Guadalcanal, then maybe the Marines are there for a few months, and then the army will take over. But it's not even close to what they're looking at D-Day. This is a completely different beast.
Yeah, and this isn't the first time someone's invaded a fortress Europe. Let's think back to Napoleonic era, like the Allies, the British, Duke of Wellington, trying to convince the Allies to land in Normandy. I'm coming up from Spain. Like let's pincer France. It just wasn't feasible though. Like at the time, the technology and the numbers weren't there to break a fortress Europe. But America changes that entire script.
Yeah, also like lines of communication.
They have the numbers, the logistics, the experience from the Pacific leading up to this.
Yeah, and I will get into that. It's when it comes to experience, it's quite different and interesting. So like I said, the vast majority for Forager, we're talking Marines in the Navy, so like two peas in a pod. We're not dealing with other stuff. Nimitz has been overlooking most of the amphibious operations, going all the way back to Guadalcanal in 42, to the Marshalls like in 44. The Fifth Fleet, Spruance, he's well versed in amphibious assaults. He's been, he dealt with the Gilberts and the Marshalls.
My boy Spruance, he's a like dare I say genius. He's so capable.
Turner, he had about 4 major amphibious assaults under his belt before Forager. And like the Pacific Fifth Fleet was the most proficient fleet in the entire world for amphibious assaults. They were the ones who did everything. For Neptune, it's interesting when you're looking at what they knew about amphibious assaults because it's a hit or a miss. The institutional level of experience, like Eisenhower, like at the very top of the tower, was good. He had planned and orchestrated the invasions of North Africa and Sicily, so Operation Torch and the Italian campaign. And that's as good as it got with Europe. Those were the two big amphibious assaults that we saw in the Atlantic theater. But
they essentially opened up brand new fronts in the war.
Yeah. And the British Admiral Bertram Ramsay, he had overall command of the naval forces, with U.S. Admiral Kirk for the Western Task Force, like I mentioned, and Philip Vane for the Eastern one. Kirk, he had served during the invasion of Sicily, so he did have some amphibious assault experience under his belt. Vane didn't. He was overlooking escort carrier operations at Salerno, so he didn't have anything really to do with the amphibious part of it. But it's experience in some form. It's not like it's nothing. Ramsay also, he did not have much to do with the planning for Operation Torch. But many of Neptune's transport and warship captains, they had participated in Torch or an Avalanche, so they had knowledge of amphibious warfare. The only thing is, it's kind of like they did this once, And unlike the Pacific, where the Pacific it's like it's a reoccurring thing and there's multiple islands, so you have like you're constantly training for this. When it comes to the European theater, it's like they spent a lot of time training for like an instant that happened like a few times in the entire war. It's very different how they went about it. But for a lot of like captains and stuff, this was like the first taste of amphibious warfare, and it's going to be D-Day for them. So it's like,
absolutely.
It's pretty crazy. Like things could have gone wrong.
Yeah, not to mention like up until this point, this is going to be the largest air landing as well.
Yep.
A parachute drop.
Yeah, gliders and parachutes.
There's a lot of groundbreaking stuff about to happen, and actually one of the concerns was the 82nd Airborne for the U.S. They had experience in dropping in Sicily, but the 101st, which would later have Easy Company,
Screaming Eagles,
like pretty well renowned. Up until this point, they had no combat experience.
Yeah, this is baptism under fire.
There was another British paratrooper division, same story. They have yet to drop anywhere, so they were combat inexperienced. So there was a little bit of concern from the Allies in that regard that they were sending in a lot of green troops.
Definitely. And
these are also troops that have been training for the last 3 years, for an operation such as this. So it's
for sure.
They're not going in ignorant.
And as for some of the defenses, when it comes to Normandy versus like a place like Saipan, it's a completely different beast because the Germans, they're going to be able to reinforce by rail, by mechanized, using by roadways. Like this is Europe, this is modern places with roads.
You're not like 3,000-4,000 miles away.
Exactly.
Think about like, what is it? The shortest distance in the English Channel from the UK to mainland Europe. It's like what, 18 miles roughly.
Yeah, it's not long.
I might be wrong about that. Yeah, it's pretty short. So like you think about it, it's like a complete opposite of the Pacific where your landings are happening
3,000 miles out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when the Allies are choosing where they're going to land, they basically have to have it in mind that the Germans, when they figure out where it's going to be, they can reinforce by rail, by road. It's going to be very quick. So they have to hit them hard, and they have to establish a beachhead that will be continuously fought over for a long period of time.
And the man in charge for the Germans, Rommel, he's probably one of the most capable German commanders of the war.
Definitely.
But unfortunately for them, him and his XO weren't even present during the landings.
Yeah, I know. It was very unfortunate for them.
They were in Berlin for a wedding or something.
Was this his wife's birthday or a wedding?
It was something.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. I mean, the story could have been different if Rommel was actually present at the time.
Sure. And as for the German naval, they have their U-boats. They had a few destroyers and some PT boats that did make some sorties for a few days, like at night, to hit some of the vessels. But like they destroyed, I think, a single destroyer and a few ships. Like, they did almost nothing, and they had to flee the scene. Like so, there was no like naval surface engagement at all.
Yeah, I think most of the naval casualties for the Allies was from the mines that they weren't able to get. Yeah, because they had a lot of deep mines. I forget the technicals of it, but they're basically almost impossible for a minesweeper to get, and they sink like 50 to 100 feet below the sea level.
Yeah.
And when it detects like a vessel nearby, almost like magnets or that, it'll pop up.
Definitely. Now, if you're looking at the other side of the world, it's the complete opposite when you're looking at Saipan. So the Japanese troops, that are on the island, they don't have any ability for reinforcement. Whatever's on Saipan is what's going to be there. So once the Americans come ashore, and the Americans are pulling in their own supplies, it's like, in a war of attrition, the Japanese are doomed from the offset. Thus, the only real defense the Japanese have is actually their navy. And when it came to Forager, the combined fleet actually came out So they sent a large group of carriers and battleships, and this would, contribute to what is called the Battle of the Philippine Sea, which was a huge engagement. The Americans ended up winning, but it was actually a pretty big fight.
But wasn't that they coined it like the Great Turkey Shoot,
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah, so the Japanese, between their land-based aircraft and their carrier aircraft, they unbelievably, with a lot of bad luck, sent green pilots, because at this point of the war, they had lost most of their veterans, and the Americans had just picked off hundreds and hundreds of their aircraft.
Their radar was so advanced at this point that they picked them up well outside of the target.
Yeah.
And they just ambushed them.
And I mean,
at this point, Hellcats and Corsairs,
the
Japs didn't stand a chance.
We're talking about Japanese in Zero fighters, not experienced pilots facing Hellcats and Corsairs. Just like it's from the pilots themselves. They called it, a regular turkey shoot, which is where the name comes from. And the loss of pilots, the Japanese were never, like, it was done after that. Like their air capabilities after that was just destroyed. It was rough.
They lost a lot of their last remaining aces in battle as well.
Yep.
We've talked about that previously. One of the downfalls of
the Japanese,
Japanese war machine was they never cycled the vets home. Like send them home to train the next generation. They never did that. They just kept them in the fight, and eventually they all perished, and they were never given the chance to pass on their knowledge and expertise.
Yeah, and they abused them. It was interesting. For the first 6 months to even a year in the war, they didn't allow them to have any rest. And when they were finally brought out of the cycle, they were actually treated like shit, interestingly enough. Like the pilots were kind of like blamed for a lot of, the terrible results by the end of the first year. Because, for the first year, like the Japanese were unanimously winning almost every engagement.
Running rampant, yeah.
But yeah, it's tragic.
Like halfway through 42.
Yeah. And, to just like compare, like Normandy sits, oh, here you go. I have an answer for you. 100 miles from Portsmouth. So.
Okay, I was a little off. Yeah.
So the English, they've been
like Dover.
For years, they built up their ports, their airfields, their road supply lines, because they're literally just building, like, I guess you could call it like a pipeline to go over into France. For Forager, it's like 1,000 miles from Eniwetok which is the nearest anchorage to Saipan.
Yeah.
And for Pearl Harbor, it's like 3,500 miles, so it's a hell of a trip. And, for these Marines and everybody that are landing on a place like Saipan, it's whatever you land with is what you're using. So if you get wounded, you're treated on Saipan. You have to hope your medics are capable. When it comes to Normandy, they're bringing every imaginable asset with them, and anything they need within a day, like half a day, can be brought over from Britain, as long as the beachhead is secured, which it was secured pretty quick.
Yeah, that's like what I'm talking about. Like a few days after D-Day, like it's basically the beachheads have been turned into sprawling cities.
Yeah,
like that includes makeshift hospitals, so access to surgeons. No one did it like the Americans, setting up logistics. Like when they were moving on, their bases that they set up, like you'd have everything: laundromats, post offices, like, and they brought all that in within the first 48 hours.
It reminds me
movie theaters.
Yeah. It reminds me today, Cody from Alter History Hub, because he always like trolls Twitter. Apparently, what is it, like some of the airplane transports when they're sending American troops today, they send a full Burger King with them to some places. It's like hilarious and so American. But yeah, the Americans, they make sure everything.
Well, we had that also. We set up
Tim Hortons,
Tim Hortons in Kandahar base.
Yeah, but I mean that sucks. I mean, if I had the choice, Burger King or like a McDonald's or something, I'm like, sure, whatever. Like Tim Hortons.
But this was back when Tim Hortons was still good. It was still I believe it was still Canadian owned. Like now it's
now it's a joke.
Once they were sold to an American company, they went really downhill.
Yeah. I can't drink their coffee, man. Their coffee is like pathetic.
It's like hot chocolate now. Yeah. It's too sweet. It doesn't even taste like coffee. But for like anyone who grew up in Canada, like 20, 30 years ago, everything was Tim Hortons. Like it was so ingrained in our culture.
Definitely. And yeah, so you know, comparing like just both of them, so they're happening simultaneously, and they couldn't be any different. Like the level of threat for the Pacific, it's the Japanese Navy is still alive and well. They got a surface fleet, and they're what could have stopped things and made it a disaster. For Normandy, it's okay. Even if we land, Rommel is capable of gathering
Yeah,
all of these
there's
men.
a lot of veteran like SS armored divisions, Warmac armored divisions. Like he's got a pretty capable war machine
Well, actually,
in the area, and
I can talk. I can talk a little bit about what the Germans were dealing with for units because I had written an episode not long ago about the strange circumstance. I don't know if you ever heard this of there was a movie made about this where some Asians were found in Wehrmacht uniforms on D-Day.
Oh yeah, the was it the
Korean, yeah.
guy? Yeah, he like served within the Soviet army as well. Like he just like
Well,
jumped around.
yeah,
a bunch.
the story was that he had served in the Imperial Japanese Army, got captured by the
Oh, right.
Soviets.
Yeah.
Then he had to serve the Red Army. Then he got captured by the Germans, like at Kursk or something. Wait, no,
Yeah.
somewhere in Ukraine. And then he travels over and he ends up like fighting in Cherbourg during D-Day. It's actually not true. What ended because there's been a thorough amount of research into this. What ended up happening is the American who had found quote unquote these Asians, he wrote in his report and he took a picture of this person. What you consider Asian, back in 1940 is kind of like whimsical. These were like Turkestani guys from Turkestan, and like he just for some reason he wrote down that they seemed to be either Japanese or Korean because no one could figure it out. But
Okay.
yeah. Anyways, it was like one of those like broken telephone stories where it just kept like
Right.
people
yeah.
added to it. But
Became a legend.
what is interesting about D-Day is they had the Germans had recently had to make these special orders by Hitler himself to release more of the Western troops to the Eastern Front because it was collapsing. So they didn't have a lot to work with. So what they did is they ended up incorporating a lot of the Ostlegionen, which is like people from even parts of Russia, Ukraine, from the Middle East, from places like Turkestan, Mongolia. These are like captured guys or volunteers that they'd take. And they're like foreign troops that are trained by the Wehrmacht or the SS at some points. And they were just given a gun and, put on the...
Yeah. Treated as like lesser auxiliaries.
Yeah, but like a lot of them. Like a D-Day, a significant amount of the troops are from like these Ligonian Ostfront people there. And I mean,
It's like what's that line from Braveheart? Said in the Irish, their lives mean nothing.
Pretty much. Like when you're looking at it, it's like not the best of the best, not dependable to be sure. A lot of the guys, they surrendered once positions were taken. A lot of guys were unwilling participants, mind you, but it wasn't looking too good. And just by the numbers, I mean, the Germans were playing around with like 50,000 guys in total that could defend certain areas, and they're being hit with like 150,000. So it's pretty rough.
And meanwhile, 24/7 air campaigns happening in the region as well.
Yeah.
So there's no rest for the Germans at this point.
And I guess, to talk about the landings, I mean, the American, because obviously my audience is like 90% American. The Americans, I assume they've heard a lot about like Utah Beach, Omaha. Well,
Utah
Omaha, of
Beach,
course. Yeah. Omaha, we got Saving Private Ryan and stuff. Like it's really ingrained in the imagination of like the hellscape that it was.
Yeah, it was the second most brutal landing of the day.
Yeah. But I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about something the Americans probably never talk about, which is what happened at Juno Beach.
Well, the other three beaches, you have Gold, Juno, and Sword.
Yeah.
Gold being a British landing, Juno in the center being a Canadian landing, and then Sword to the right of that being the other British landing. Juno Beach, yeah, all Canadians. The two landings, like comparing Juno and Omaha, they couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
Like Saving Private Ryan shows it pretty well. That at that landing site, it was fight for the beach, and then you got to climb the cliff and take out the emplacements there, and then basically it's just like fields and forests beyond that.
Yeah.
But for the Canadians landing in Juno, their stretch of the beach, there were two large villages right on the water, and the Germans up until this point they've been fortifying that village with trench networks, underground tunnels, and just like machine gun nests everywhere. So it turned into like it was brutal taking the beach itself, but then they had to fight through the villages as well, and just absolutely brutal, house to house, a lot of hand to hand fighting, close quarters.
Yeah, it's
The casualty rate at Juno was the worst of the day. They were at 19% casualties. Omaha, where we see like the brutality in Saving Private Ryan, that was only 18%. Very similar, but yeah, Juno was just absolutely brutal because like you didn't know what was in the next house, and they were fighting for every inch basically.
yeah, and
At that point, like you miss out on artillery support from the Navy and air support because like as you're taking houses, you can't be blowing up the same house you just came from.
yeah, and for the Canadian
Essentially,
forces,
they're on their own there.
for the Canadian forces at Juno, they had to dig in actually pretty early amongst the enemy. Like you said, it was house to house fighting, and it was pretty grueling. Juno Beach was not a easy cakewalk. Omaha, yeah, they're very different in nature because like in Omaha, there's more units involved, and the casualties are less per capita, I guess, compared to the Canadians, like you said, percentage wise. But they were in the thousand, like there was like 2,000 casualties for Omaha. It was big, but they got through the brunt of it at the beginning, and then it was like kind of like field. So like for the beachhead itself, it was established quickly. Whereas for us Canadians in Juno, it was longer. Like we didn't even take like the nearby airfield for quite a while. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And as for the British,
yeah, there was a lot of defense and resistance in the way.
Yeah. And the two British beaches, of course, were nearby with Juno. So eventually, they all linked up to form kind of like a giant beachhead.
Yeah, was it Band of Brothers shows it well. The 101st being tasked with taking Carentan, and the importance of that city was it was basically the hub that would link the American and the British and Canadian forces together.
Yeah. I think something that's lost in translation for a lot of people who are thinking about D-Day is they imagine, it's like this one day event where in a period of a few hours, these guys land and then it's kind of like said and done.
It was ongoing.
Yeah, it was long.
It was like, that's why there's like D-Day +1, D-Day +2. The operation wasn't over for weeks after.
And I can speak on behalf of for the Pacific War because I've covered almost every single landing except for what happens in late 44 by this point. Every landing kind of has the same tendency where the first day, it's almost unanimous that a beachhead is formed. And then by day 2, the perimeter is extending and very little resistance. The Japanese always tended to be taken aback, pulled back, and then they would come in either maybe day 2 or day 3 and they start to do like some attacks on the perimeter, like a counterattack. But for this, it's like, no, you've entered continental Europe and now every single day is just a fight. So these beachheads it was a constant front line just being pushed gradually forward.
Yeah. Tug of war between the Allies and the Axis.
And Rommel would actually he would meet an untimely end, stupidly enough. When did Hitler have him killed? I can't remember how.
Allegedly.
Oh, allegedly. Well, what was it? He was given the choice if he would kill himself or not, and
yeah, because he was linked to the Valkyrie plot, even though like there was no evidence for that.
Yeah,
historians still speculate if he was involved in the Valkyrie plot, and evidence suggests he had no knowledge of it.
They had just used his name, wasn't it?
Yeah, Hitler was so paranoid at this point. If somebody's name was dropped, even wrongfully, he had no patience. He would just remove them.
Yeah, it's pretty stupid to kill one of your best commanders when you need him most.
Yeah. But Rommel was also one of the few that was comfortable saying no to Hitler.
Yeah, there wasn't many of them by the end of it.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody just became a yes man by late
Yeah.
44 and
Well,
45.
it was, it's either you say yes or you get removed.
Yeah. And in the
We see that in the Eastern Front a lot. Like all his yes men, marshals, like, oh yes, we can do that. We can land an entire, well, like at Stalingrad, it's like, oh yeah, we can keep them supplied with the Luftwaffe.
well, that was Goring.
No problem. And, yeah.
I mean, Goring is just an idiot. Like Goring, he does the same thing with the Battle of Britain. He's like, we're just gonna defeat the British, and you know what? For Operation Sea Lion, we probably can land guys.
Just because you write it on paper, it's possible.
Yeah. I mean, like, if you really
a fantasy war at that point,
if you really look at Goring, if they had taken him out of that position, gave him some kind of more of just stupid political role or whatever, honestly, the guy just he was like a wine and diner. His whole job was like, the reality of his job in the beginning was he was the guy that the conservatives and the industrialists liked because he was a monarchist kind of guy, and he's an old school guy, like aristocratic, right?
He was a celebrity of World War One. He flew with the Red Baron Rick Thompson.
Exactly. And he worked over the industrialists, because I think something that people don't like to hear about is Hitler was at the whim of a lot of like big business owners, and they were controlling the shots. So like the owner of Krupp's manufacturing and stuff, like these guys were actually pushing on Hitler to do some things. It wasn't like unanimous Hitler just decided on something and did it. Like, especially in the early years of the war, it was a lot of the weapons manufacturers who are like kind of pulling the strings. And Goring was one of the main guys who talked to these like head honchos of the business world, because Hitler was absolutely useless. Like, he was an idiot when it comes to anything economic. Like, oh my God.
Yeah, he was pretty much just high all the time at this point also.
Yeah. And even his the guy that he would appoint, Albert Speer, who had really no background in economics, just an architect, he actually had to get the Germans into a full wartime economy, like at the end of the war. Like, they weren't even properly building things, because the Germans, they had this whole model where like the tank was built like start to finish by like the same guy. It wasn't Ford factory, like a bunch of people on an assembly line.
Production, automated assembly line, basically.
Yeah, and all the
maybe not automated, but yeah,
all the arsenal like buildings like that made certain parts that would go to certain places. Like, they all weren't talking to each other and stuff, so it was really clumsy. It was slow. And by
something as simple as just painting the armor.
Yeah.
Like, many of the Tigers and that would just like sit on the factory line, just waiting to be painted. Whereas like the Allies were like, okay, paint's unnecessary. Like, just give it basic, camouflage. But no, the German, every single piece of their armor had to be intricately painted. Make it glorious.
Yeah. Well, I mean, their own vanity really screwed them over.
It is vanity. That's it.
Yeah, I won't get into the weeds with that, but it is interesting how like freaking like the German economy and the way that they built things, like they were not prepared for a world war, despite what people think. Like, even they had no oil. Like, it's insane.
That's a good topic. I mean, I realize at this point we've hardly even touched the D-Day landings yet. I have to run, but you want to make this a two-parter, something, or continue it tomorrow?
Yeah, we can make this a two-parter. Definitely.
Like, we're basically, we're at like the eve of D-Day. We haven't really talked about the intricacies of it yet.
Yeah, here we'll talk. We'll make the second part about like what happens like on D-Day and like
the actual landing and stuff. And
sure.
Moving in from there.
All right, that sounds good. So for now, everybody, this has been part 1 of I guess we'll call it our series on D-Day.
Yeah, 80th anniversary D-Day.
Yeah. All right, see you guys.
Bye.